Good afternoon. My name is Joyce Hunter, and I am the Executive Director of the Institute for Critical Infrastructure Technology. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Illumio and DT Technologies, and for their participation in bringing you this webinar, a fireside chat with Nick Chaillan, 1 year later evaluating the impact of the Executive Order 14028. A little bit about the Institute for Critical Infrastructure Technology, ICIT, before we get started. We are the nation's leading cybersecurity think tank, providing objective, nonpartisan research, advisory, and education to legislative, commercial, and public sector cybersecurity stakeholders. ICIT programs and initiatives support cybersecurity leaders and practitioners in all 16 critical infrastructure sectors defined by the Department of Homeland Security and can be leveraged by other community members impacted by digital adversaries, including small and medium business owners, academia, and other industries impacted by digital threats. Thank you very much for joining us. I am now going to turn this over to Don McLean with DLT.
Thanks, Joyce. Thanks, Joyce. I'm Don McLean with DLT. I'm Chief Cybersecurity Technologist there. And today we're just going to talk about the impact of Executive Order 14028, which for those of you out there that don't have your executive order numbers completely memorized, was an executive order around cybersecurity, and one of its hallmarks was to mandate the implementation of zero trust security in every agency. And to address that, we have Gary Barlet, Gary Barlet of Illumio, and Nick Chaillan, who is well known, I think, throughout the industry and needs no introduction. So I'm going to just kick it off with allowing both of them to introduce themselves, and then speak about the executive order. The title says 1 year later, but that's not exactly true. It's 1 year and 2 months later, but who's counting? Well, apparently I am. So anyway, Gary, why don't you kick it off and we can hand it off to Nick.
Sure, thanks, Don. So I'm Gary Barlet. I'm the federal CTO at Illumio. Prior to this, I spent 10 years as a federal CIO, and then prior to that, 20 years as a cyberspace operations officer with the United States Air Force. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to a robust discussion. Nick?
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nick Chaillan, the former Chief Software Officer for the Air Force and Space Force, and I'm also, I guess, an entrepreneur. I founded 12 companies, and now joined a few boards and created the Learn with Nick and In a Nick of Time platform. We're going to be investing in ourselves to learn and make sure we're not getting behind China.
Might be a little late for that, but okay.
Yes, all behind. Okay.
So Nick, where do you think we stand? Do you think the executive order is actually resulting in significant changes in cybersecurity, or has it just been kind of a paper tiger?
Well, you know, executive orders don't hurt, but they're not the silver bullet we think they are, right? So I helped, obviously, when I was still in the government, work on this EO, and it's pushing both the zero trust capability, but also the software bill of materials, and we've seen pretty significant progress, at least in the mind of people in terms of discussions. Not so much tangible outcomes, but you know, things take time, unfortunately, in the government. So what you've seen is more engagements, more discussions. I've yet to see a lot of funding being allocated to zero trust and software bill of material capabilities. So that's obviously an issue, and you know, we still need to step up the game. It's pretty interesting that, you know, when I joined DHS about 6 years ago now, I was already working with Google Beyond Corp at the time on zero trust, and we were pushing zero trust for the new cyber architecture, cyber.gov, that was supposed to be kind of the future of cyber for the .gov side of the house. And we had a great support from DHS SNT with Doug Mon, and of course NPPD at the time, and now the agency that is CISA at the time did not believe in zero trust and shut it down. Now the same people are on the commercial side selling consulting services to get you to zero trust, so that works pretty well.
So Gary, how do you see the impact of the executive order? Do you think it's getting there?
Yeah, I think it's getting there. I think to Nick's point, right? One of the biggest points is an executive order never hurts, right? I know in my role as a CIO, it was always nice when instead of going in to talk to my boss to talk about securing funding, it didn't just seem like it was a good idea that I came up with that I read on an in-flight magazine somewhere or some vendor whispered in my ear. It was always nice to be able to point to something like an executive order and go, look, this is serious, right? This is getting some serious attention. So it certainly makes it a lot more, I think, beneficial for those out there that are trying to implement Zero Trust to have some things that they can point to and use as kind of a reference and kind of a guidance to say, look, this is important and something that we need to focus on and that we need to put some resources toward. To Nick's point, unfortunately in the government, right, that takes time. It's, you're trying to chip away at an iceberg sometimes, but if you don't get started, you're never going to get finished. So I think the executive order really helped to kickstart that effort in the government.
Yeah, executive orders to me remind me of Steve Jobs's, quote that ideas are easy and execution is hard. Executive orders are the idea, but then when you have to actually execute, it becomes much more difficult. I think one of the big things is that the executive orders don't come with money attached usually, and that kind of makes life a little bit easier if you have some money to get this done. That said, there was a recent allocation of fairly significant allocation of I think about $15 billion to cybersecurity in general, which hopefully will translate into some Zero Trust implementation. Nick, you're one of the few people that has really and truly executed or actually implemented Zero Trust architectures. First, you worked on Google BeyondCore, and then also you set up a lab, I believe, or was it an actual implementation at the Air Force around Zero Trust? So could you tell us a little bit about more, about some of those experiences? What was good, what was bad, what was hard, et cetera?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it demonstrated that we can do it with no funding. Really, we were able to get this done, which is really the largest implementation of Zero Trust, I think, in the U.S. government, in 45 days, and of course it grew since then from the unclassified side all the way to all classification levels, and so we're able to make Zero Trust a reality both on the cloud and on premise, bypassing the traditional outdated perimeter defense mechanisms of the Department of Defense. And so it took a lot of collaborations with DoD, CM, and DISA. Funny enough, the same people that used to be running the or stopping me, I guess, from doing Zero Trust in the Air Force and Space Force at DISA are now the people in charge of Zero Trust at DISA, which makes a lot of sense. That's what you want. So overall, I think it's a matter of pushing and not slowing down. And when you have a momentum and by the way, all this was way before the executive order. In fact, it was right before COVID, and it was a drastic enabler for the Air Force and Space Force to be able to have all this remote workforce be able to connect to clouds without having to VPN to NIPR, which at the time would have been literally a total debacle. Right. And it bypasses, the caps and the cloud access point. And so we created the cloud native access point. We funded it with initial very small funding, and then we built it to be an enterprise service that's centrally funded to keep the lights on, and then it's a consumption funding, which is really the easiest way to do work in the government. Too many people don't think as an enterprise, as a startup in the government. I like to think that way, obviously, because that's my background. But also it's easier to get funded when you show up and you ask for a massive pot of money to fund an enterprise service from day one with very little to show for it. It's pretty unlikely you're going to get the funding. But if you show up and say, hey, give me a couple of $1 million to do this, and then we grow through adoption of actual customers that will pay per user, and you make it a service that's really prioritizing the customer outcomes. That's how you end up building meaningful capability. That's how we funded the bulk of Cloud One and Platform One, which is a DevSecOps team in DoD, and also the Cloud Native Access Point, which is now really a must for teams doing DevSecOps, so they can connect to the cloud and not have to VPN to NIPR first.
Right. So you've mentioned about a couple of groups of people that have really changed their thinking around Zero Trust, have gone from opponents to proponents. What do you think is responsible for that change of heart? I mean, what brought them around? Was it you?
I don't know. Well, some of it, we took some, I mean, look, we took some time and really, you know, we built the largest coalition of the willing. That's one thing we were able to do. You know, not everybody loves me. I think it's probably a 50-50. And I'll take it, you know, because if you're loved by everybody, you probably did not do much in the government, you know. So I'm happy that only 50% of the people actually like me. That's okay. As long as the taxpayer are getting the right outcomes, that's all I care about. And so, you know, we spent a lot of time to build the largest community of practice for DevSecOps and also for Zero Trust. And really, when we demonstrated as a small initial pilot that we could do this in 45 days and get accredited, initially, you know, through a waiver process, but I really insisted that the waiver becomes, you know, a change of policy, and we did it before the executive order. So all this stuff was not achieved through the top-down approach of the executive order, which now obviously is really when I think most of the rest of the proponent decided to suddenly fall in love with the Zero Trust principle. And so that's obviously helpful for people not to have to fight that fight anymore. But that also demonstrates that you can do it without it, right? We've done it without it with a very small group of people. Obviously, with me not really caring about, you know, asking for apologies and just getting things done. And when you have a momentum in the government, I find that most government employees are not going to get in the way of outcomes. And if they are worried about their career, you know, and don't want to do something, they also don't want to get in the middle of something good and also put their career at risk on that other side. And so usually I don't see anyone slowing us down, and that's what I've seen, you know, in the last 4 years being in the government.
Yeah, I mean, just speaking from my own experience, not having been in the government, but having been on site of the government for many years, I do find that most of them are really dedicated certain public servants that really want to get a good job done. I think quite often.
No doubt.
Yeah, so
I think the biggest thing that Nick just demonstrated there is the fact that the government can do this, right, Nick? I mean, you know, there's a lot of mindset out there that the government's too big, they can't do anything. Well, they can. They just gotta carve it out and make the decision that they're going to commit to it and go to it. And like you said, sometimes people just have to get out of the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why, you know, thinking as a startup in the government, right, and really seeing the DoD programs as your customer and trying to please the customer and still build an enterprise service that's scalable, but do it organically is a better way, right? Because if you get too much money too soon, you end up having these bloated bureaucracy nonsense, right? And you don't get anything done. In fact, you know, what I fear is a lot of the stuff I created organically is now becoming part of the traditional program process, and you see massive bloated, you know, outcomes, and often you see the velocity and the ability to deliver tangible capabilities to the warfighter going down the drain very quick. And so that's kind of the issue, is how do you really make this stuff stick? The issue is, of course, you know, most people in the government don't really have that entrepreneurial background. And so, you know, if you put a, you know, career military personnel in charge of something, they're very much taught about acquisition and the contracting process, and they don't really think as a startup. And so, you know, they go back to what they know. It's not malicious, it's not, you know, incompetence, it's just what it is. But that tells you that the need to also be able to bring people from the outside and have people that can innovate from within, and it's completely doable. It's just a good excuse to pretend it's not.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the big obstacles to any major undertaking, is just overcoming those cultural obstacles, the background that may not be commensurate with the new innovative process. Gary, what are some of the success stories that you've seen around Zero Trust implementation?
So when you look at, you know, Nick will tell you, I mean, obviously the CNAP program in the Air Force, but when you look commercially, right, commercially, they've gone, you know, all in with Zero Trust. And you've seen a lot of success stories there. I think the federal government and the military are really playing catch up in this role. I think you're seeing small pockets of some success. And as Nick mentioned, right now that you're starting to see some of these larger entities starting to get on board with it, I think the next couple of years are going to be a very interesting time for the federal government and the military and you'll start to see more successes there to start to mirror the successes that I think Nick will agree have been going on for years in the commercial sector. But I think that honestly, right now, I think Nick's spot on with saying that it's that change in mentality that's going to be necessary in order for it to actually have any chance of succeeding.
Yeah. Did you find, Nick, that was different from Google, or was Google just a commercial version of a large organization with the same sort of baggage when you were doing the work?
It's pretty much the same. There's no difference. We like to believe we're special. Of course, the mission is special, and the people are special, and the fighter are special, and we love them. But the IT is IT. And we like to pretend it's not, because the defense industrial base is very happy to make it special, so we end up being locked in and into some black box that we end up sustaining for 20 years. So that's convenient for everybody in the DoD bubble. But the fact is IT and software is software. And we've seen in space, SpaceX has completely disrupted kind of the use of space hardware and really using Linux open source with real-time patching on top and be able to do it at scale and with no problem, with a velocity that no one has yet to achieve. So it's completely doable. I think you go back to the principle and the lack of understanding of agility. That's why I decided to create this learning platform, because honestly, I always go back to learning. When I was in the department, we partnered with the Defense Acquisition University, and we created a pretty good curriculum for agility and DevSecOps. But of course, it was nice to have it not mandated by DAU and OSD ANS, and so most of the employees will still take the traditional waterfall outdated training. And then you wonder why we have no ability to innovate. If you're stuck in this waterfall 5-year requirement cycle, and look, Congress is part of the problem too, right? They ask us to start, defining funding 5 years ahead and estimating down to very small buckets of PEs where we're going to be spending the money, where really we should really be focused on broader buckets that get more and more precise for the year of execution. It's pretty common sense, but that will also require more transparency with Congress, so they actually trust us, which is what we've done, at Platform One, by creating the very first dashboard that is a live dashboard of the velocity of work, so Congress could see in real time how the money was spent and where and how. And so that gives you real-time visibility, but in exchange, you're going to give me a little bit more freedom as far as how much to plan ahead in the spending of that money, so we don't end up being stuck in time and buying the wrong things at the wrong time. So it's really, the whole system is pretty much broken, if you want to be able to innovate and move at a pace of relevance. So that's why, we went back and, DAU, when I did this training, it's kind of funny, right? Because I listened to some of the videos we did, and they had quite a bit of views, but it's in 2 years, it was completely obsolete. So I tried to partner with universities, and universities were very happy to use my name and charge a fortune to the students to get a fancy piece of paper, but they were not willing to update the curriculum more than every 5 years. And so that was non-starter for me. Obviously, this stuff is moving way too fast. And so we had no choice but to kind of create our own curriculum, because, we wanted people to be able to learn, and we wanted to be able to keep up with what's going on. That's why, we're going to give a 50% discount for the military and civilians, because we want them to really understand what it takes to be agile, down to the not just the software side, but the entire program management. So we have like deep dives on acquisition and contracting and contract vehicle, and how did we do it, with the Platform One contract vehicle we created for DevSecOps. And so it's doable, right? It's just, people don't know what they don't know.
Yeah. So Gary, what do you think would be the single best argument in favor of zero trust? If you're seeking funding, I mean, Nick's Platform One would certainly be a great argument for it. But I mean, if you were to go to Congress and ask for money for zero trust implementation, what do you think are, well, I won't limit you to one, but what do you think are some of the most significant and cogent arguments to zero trust?
So I think so it's interesting, right? I think the most successful argument is also, in some people's minds, so it's controversial, which is, zero trust is about assumed breach, right? And defending against that and trying to mitigate the impact of that, right? And here's the reality: story after story, year after year, all we see is we throw money after trying to prevent a breach, and we completely ignore what happens after the breach, right? The only time we talk about after the breach is when we start talking about all the data that got exfiltrated, right, or the complete impact of the breach. But we never do anything. I think the most successful thing is say, look, we're not going to give up on trying to prevent breach, but let's be honest, right? One mistake, one 0-day vulnerability, and all your efforts can potentially go out the window. However, let's focus on what happens after the breach before it turns into a disaster, right? And I think that whole concept of understanding what you have, having visibility, segmenting off inside your enterprise so that you can mitigate and limit the impact of a breach. I think the problem is that's a whole new concept for some people that are very entrenched in the old ways of thinking of my job is to stop a breach, right? And trying to overcome that, I think, is one of the big challenges that I think still to this day some people struggle with zero trust, is the fact that it seems to imply that I'm not supposed to try to prevent a breach.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned segmentation. Talk to me a little bit more about segmentation. Network segmentation, micro-segmentation. These terms can sometimes be a little bit confusing to people. So I just wanted to see what you could offer on that. I think Nick probably has something to say. I can see by his eager face over there. But I'm going to give Gary the floor for the moment.
Sure. I think in the past when people talk about segmentation, they've always talked about network segmentation, which is I'm going to do it by IP address. I'm going to break things up. I'm going to create VLANs. And the reality is it just is unmanageable and unworkable in my opinion, right? The reality is we need to be looking at on a smaller scale, doing it application by application, box by box, and trying to determine what should actually be talking to what and how should it be talking to each other. And if it's not an approved channel of communication, then everything else should be turned off. And it has to be dynamic, right? It has to be in this world of being able to in DevSecOps of people being able to spin up servers, with the click of a button, and being able to increase the number of applications in a relatively short period of time. It's got to be very dynamic and very fluid, but it's got to be practical in such a way that it will actually, if I spin up a web server and I've already predefined that web servers can only talk to two things, that any web server I spin up should have that policy applied and only talk to those two things. And I shouldn't have to worry about chasing down what subnet is it on, what VLAN should it be in. And I think it's just a different way of approaching this. And until we really get to that point where we're trying to limit what can talk to what in a very practical way, we're going to continue to struggle, I think.
Yeah. So Nick, I mean, what role did, or what do you think are some of the most significant technical elements of zero trust, and the ones that you think are the absolute musts in your implementations of Platform One?
Well, I can tell you, zero trust publications are becoming more and more bloated, and it's pretty concerning to me. Soon enough, it's going to be all of cyber, so it's a problem. I think what we had initially was pretty clear. And now everybody is pretending to do pieces of zero trust, right? But if you go back to the basics, I think it's a few things, right? One is the device enforcement. People forget about the device way too often, right? So being able to know what device is being used by your users, if it's a personal device, if it's a laptop, if it's a desktop, whatever, the state of the device, if it's being patched, what kind of endpoint protection solution you have on the device, right? So that's the first piece, is having a good identity of the device and tracking the device state. The second piece would be the user identity, right? So one of the really most critical piece of all of this is going back to the labeling of users and the roles of the users, but really, we're moving away from roles both to granular labels that can be labeled both to resources on the data side and the application side, and then on the user, so you only get access to what you see. So a database that has maybe some PII and PHI and sensitive data, if it's labeled very granularly down to the cell level, you could assign labels to users and they only get to see what they're supposed to see. So that's a very critical piece, of course, with multi-factor authentication and all the beauty of modern identity management. So you're gonna compound the risk now of the user identity and the device being used, and based on the component risk of that device plus user, you're going to now create what we call a software-defined parameter, which is really a fancy way to say it's a on-demand network that's agnostic to where the resources are located, right? So it could be on the cloud, it could be on premise, could be at the edge, and so and multiple clouds too, right? And so the beauty with what we built with the cloud native access point is based on the device risk and where you are. So if I use a government issued device, or if I use my personal device, I don't get access to the same resources because the risk is not the same. So we kind of have a process to really define the risk and assess the risk and grade the risk, and then based on that, you get access to what you're supposed to be able to have access to. And then you can add on top of it, time of the day and geofencing and different other criteria of whitelisting. So you could say, from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. you have access to these resources, but after hours you need maybe a second person to approve access or whatever, right? And then there's a data piece, right, where the data needs to be labeled too, right, and the applications. So then you have the full loop system of the labeling. So both the data itself down to the cell level and the applications and servers and whatever resources, containers, whatever you use, is labeled. And then, based on the risk of the device and the user, you only get access to what you should be able to see.
Yeah, I know you've expressed some concern about how to implement, policy decision points and enforcement points on an enterprise level. Can you speak a little bit to that about, what are some of the problems that you foresee and how they might be overcome? So.
Well, I was I'm not gonna lie, I was a little disappointed when DoD CIO with this decided to do their own pilot, as you want to call it, of zero trust in a vacuum, right? They decided not to use the CNAP, and they started from scratch with booze, which is fine. It was supposed to be a 6 months engagement and turned into now what's going to be a 2-year engagement. Keep in mind, we had the CNAP up and running in 45 days. After 6 months, they couldn't get it done, which is kind of, pretty disgraceful, because they picked them because they said they would do it in 6 months, and now they're not even rebidding the contract to give others the opportunity to compete. So I find that to be pretty concerning. So now they're going to get 2 years of funding, all to not be able to get it done anyways, instead of just using CNAP, augmenting it or accelerating its growth when CNAP is already across all fabric. And by the way, they're just trying to do it on class. That's kind of the easy way to do all of this stuff. We were able to do it completely air-gapped all the way to SAP, okay? So, clearly this kind of reinventing the wheel, not invented here, toxicity, particularly when it's not motivated by tangible facts, is pretty scary to me. The initial reason was allegedly they wanted a second option to compare, which could make sense, right? I mean, I could agree with that. If you say, hey, we're big, we want to have 2 options to compare. Okay, but if after 6 months you don't get it done and we did it in 45 days, then you have something going on here, and you don't just extend it for 2 years, And by the way, the money spent is about 7x to what we spent on CNAP. So it's not only 7 times more money, but also countless more time spent on this capability. And why it matters is back to your question, right? Why I'm telling this story is because you cannot federate. You can federate identity management, but it's very difficult to federate a policy enforcement point, because the minute you're going to federate, let's say we let Navy, Army, and Air Force do whatever they want in vacuums and fourth estate, then you would, if you want to get to a JEDC2, all domain IoT magical thing that's not going to put us at tremendous risk against China to hack us, then you want to have zero trust, right? And it's not just you want to have it, it's a must. And if you want to have that, then you need to have a policy enforcement point that's holistic across the enterprise. And if you're just going to have everybody doing things in vacuum, what you're going to see is you're going to be forced to whitelist and trust the policy enforcement point of the Navy and the Army and the Air Force in vacuums with very little understanding to what's going on, which effectively is just blindly trusting something else, which kind of defeat the point of zero trust. So, I just don't see how you could federate a policy enforcement point at scale. So, the issue you see is OSD is effectively becoming so scared of mandating the wrong things, they're not willing to mandate anything. And OSD is the same, and CIO is the same. And so, because there were some good mandates, I argue at the time, that became stale and behind, and that's the thing, right? With mandates, it has to be a living and breathing thing, and you have to stay on top of it because it's an important decision for the enterprise. but it doesn't mean you don't mandate anything too, right? So people never overreact, and the services will say, oh, I don't want to be mandated or told what to do. Well, there's some things that where it's not a problem, but there are things, particularly when it comes to zero trust, and even maybe like DevSecOps capabilities, where really we should have an enterprise service. You wouldn't see on Amazon or Google let everybody build their ICAM or their zero trust stack in vacuums. That would just never happen. But yet they let you, you know, pick your programming languages, your databases as a service. You have a lot of flexibility for other things, right? So that's always been my mindset. You know, there are things that you only want to have one option. There are things you want to have a couple of options to have fair competition. There are things where you have 50 options, whatever, right? But I can tell you for zero trust, it's the one thing that you really want to have across the enterprise. If you really are pretending that you want to get something like JetC2 done, otherwise it's just all talk, you know.
Yeah. So, Gary, one of the things that I read a lot of things that say, you know, getting started with zero trust, where do I start, et cetera, et cetera. And to me, the thing that's always missing from those is the most important question, which is engineering 101. What problem are we trying to solve here? In other words, what the heck problem is zero trust actually trying to solve? Because if you don't know that, how do you know if it succeeded? So what do you think are, you know, the most significant problems that zero trust is actually aimed at solving?
Well, I think Nick touched on it, right? Understanding who's accessing what, when are they accessing it, how are they accessing it, you know, what are they getting access to? You know, those are the you know, the bigger problems. I think that the reason why so many people struggle is, you know, when you take all that as a whole, it seems very daunting, right? It's right. Especially if you think about your enterprise as a complete enterprise and you're trying to think of everything all at once. I think that's a mistake that so many people make and so many entities make, is they don't start somewhere, right? I think it's that whole, you know, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. And I think so many agencies get so wrapped around the axle of the complexity and the hugeness of the problem that they can't get out of their own way and get started. And I think that what they really need to do is just get started and you know, maybe, you know, pick, you know, you always hear about, you know, the most high value asset. Start there, right? Yeah. Pick the simplest thing, right? Hey, we've got this small thing that if we completely blow it, no harm, no foul, because, you know, it was kind of a small component. You know, those are decisions, personal decisions, I think that different entities have to make. But I think that the only way that they're going to get anywhere in their zero trust journey is to get started and pick something that makes sense, that's manageable to them, that doesn't feel overwhelming, and just you know, identify what that is and start to apply some of these concepts that Nick so well laid out, and start applying those things to a particular thing and then grow it. I think sometimes it's fine to try to swing for the fence. I think for a lot of entities, I think that's a big ask. So hit a single, right? You know, pick something small and get started, and then build upon that success. And success breeds success. I think Nick will agree with that. Success breeds success.
Fail fast, fail often, but not the same way twice, right?
Yeah, yeah. So, but one thought, right, that you want to be careful though, right? And I've seen it firsthand is when people start going, you know, and I've seen it in DoD where people focus on business stuff instead of weapon stuff because it's just easy, right? It's not the mission of the department to do business stuff, right? We're here to do weapons, and so my take is, okay, you want to pick simple, that's fine, but it has to be still something impactful to the mission. And I would argue, you know, doing zero trust now in 2022 is not like doing zero trust back in 2016 when we started. And so there's not much excuse to say it's hard anymore. I mean, it's not rocket science. And in fact, you know, I'm afraid that by the time DoD CIO is getting done his zero trust plan in 2027 or 2028 that he's talking about, zero trust is going to be obsolete and long gone. It's going to be something else. So you know, timeliness matter, and we don't have all the time in the world. So I would actually argue it's probably better to pick something meaningful. You know, that's why when I do DevSecOps, I pick F-16 jets on legacy hardware, you know, 60 years old hardware, because then we got the excitement and the momentum from the leadership, you know, so they wanted to be part of this, and we showed everybody that it was possible also on the difficult things. So the way I like to do it is bring people that have done stuff before, right? Don't just bring people to solve these problems that have never done it before. You know, if you have only people that have never done zero trust before, have no expertise, probably don't want to bring these people in DoD in the hardest environment in the world, right? So because of my experience, and if you bring people with experience to do this, they will be able to do it. But pick something meaningful enough. I mean, it doesn't have to be the hardest problem, but I wouldn't go simple either, right? Because then you have no real tangible outcome and you have no data, no one is excited, there's no momentum. So, you know, just pick something pretty hard, you know, not maybe crazy hard, but not too easy either.
That makes a lot of sense, Nick. So, you know, I see tons of documentation, guidelines, et cetera, frameworks, and so on from the government on how to do zero trust. Huh? What'd you say?
At paper. We're good at paper.
Are any of these of any use? If so, which one would you recommend? Because I've seen DoD reference architecture, NSA as a maturity model, NIST has put stuff out, CISA, and so on and so forth. And so, I mean, what, you know, which of those, I mean, are worthy of attention? Should you just try to aggregate them all into something coherent, or is there one that you would point to, or you just say throw it all out? It's just a bunch of paper.
Is that to me the question, or is that to Gary?
Oh, sorry, that was to either one. Jump ball.
Nick, go ahead.
All right, sure. Well, look, paper is okay, right? I mean, you need some of it. I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty upset when we released the first DevSecOps, which really has zero trust as a pillar, right? So it's a great way to get started in zero trust with DevSecOps. And I was a little upset when NSA just literally copied and pasted most of our documents without even mentioning us in the references, you know, a year and a half after we've done it. So it's, you know, it's a little disappointing, but whatever. But at the end of the day, I think you wanna, you know, NIST is doing some pretty good stuff, right? The issue with the NIST publication is it's so abstract, it's so vague, it's just, I don't always find a ton of tangible guidance as far as how to do it. What we released, you know, I'm biased obviously because I helped do it, but if you go on the software.af.mil website, you're gonna see under the SOP documents, you're gonna find a lot of the architecture designs of CNAP and the zero trust implementation, and we open source a lot of it, and so I think you know, having a tangible example of how it was done in the largest organization on the planet, that's a better, you know, way to get started. There's plenty of, you know, but the issue, if you look even at this publication, it's so bloated. If you listen to them effectively, zero trust is pretty much all of cyber, right? There's just not a lot missing from the architecture, and it's just so bloated. You're never gonna get there, right? So I don't like it. You know, I like it to be precise enough, you know. And there's different maturity, right, of adoption, and you want to keep track of that, and it's a never-ending journey, and blah blah, and it's gonna change and all that good stuff, right? But maybe spend less time reading the stuff and start doing a little bit more. I don't know.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, because as I read through all this stuff, it was all broad, notional, conceptual, and
it was written by people that have never done it. It's that simple. You know, it's
I know.
They don't know how to do it. So what are they gonna say?
Yeah. So Gary, what's your take on some of the guidance coming out from the government?
Yeah, it's funny. I was going to say the same thing that Nick did, which is, I mean, there's some good general guidance out there. And again, to Nick's point, I think that some of the NIST guidance is good. It's just not, it's not a playbook, right? It's not something that you can turn around and hand to somebody and go, okay, now go, you know, here's a step-by-step guide to go do this. But I'm not sure that there's really, you know, some of this is so nuanced based on who you are and what you do have in place today or what you don't have in place today. I'm not sure any of them are really going to do that for you. But to Nick's point, I think that again, just get started, right? Pick something. There's plenty of people out there that can help you do this, and dive into it and get started. Use your own expertise that you bring in, or learn, right? Heaven forbid you actually, you know, sit down and do some good research on your own and learn it and develop an architecture that works for you. Again, I think there's a lot of architectures out there, and I just think that so many of them have gotten so big and so generalized, and to Nick's point, trying to encompass everything, that I just think they lack some practical usage and application to just solve an everyday problem that people are facing.
And more importantly, right, start hiring people. You know, we're 2022, right? This was created 6 years ago. I mean, look, it's continuously evolving and changing. But the fact is, now you can find people with some experience, right? And so hire people with experience to do it, right? But You know, it's just foolish to think we can bring this kind of stuff in very complex government organizations with people with zero experience in the subject matter, right? So you probably want to spend less time on reading papers and more time on hiring the right people with the right subject matter expertise that have done it before and can help you get it done, you know?
Yeah, and so I mean, you had your experience from Google to bring to the table when you did your Air Force implementation. So that's yeah, and you're absolutely correct. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that simply have not done it, you know. But now we're starting to see a little bit more traction, you know, on the actual.
But they're all expert in zero trust. You know, if you talk to them, they'll tell you all you need to know. So.
Yeah, right. Well, that's why it's great to have people like you on the both of you on the or I won't call it a panel on the talk today, because both of you have actually done some of this, especially you, Nick. So I think it's time to throw the audience questions out. Anyone? If there's anyone out there that wants to give us a question or give our guests a question, that would be fine with me.
We have a couple of really great topics that have shown up in several questions. So our first one, I'm going to do it based off of how we talked through the session. Our first one is going back to the conversation about microsegmentation and what steps does an agency need to take if they want to implement microsegmentation?
You know who the question is for? Is it for Gary?
Gary, why don't you take
it? It is for the group.
Sure, I'll take it. So I think that the first step is some visibility, right? And understanding if you're going to microsegment, you've got to understand what you have and what's talking to what and what should be talking to what. Because I think that's a big mistake that happens is when you look at the way that a lot of these compromises occur with the East-West movement through a network. Oftentimes they're using ports and protocols that the enterprise, the people responsible for running the enterprise weren't even aware were open. They said, oh, those two servers should have never been talking to each other. They had no business, communicating with each other. So having that visibility and understanding what's talking to what's connected to what, I think is important. And then you start shutting off the things that aren't needed. Shut off the ports. I mean, RDP. Most, the hackers love RDP. Why do they love RDP? Because there's so many places RDP is open, and people don't even realize it's open. Oh, great! I just granted you full access to my box, unfettered access to my box. Didn't even know there was no reason for RDP to be turned on that box, and yet I've got it turned on. And it's turned on not because somebody turned it on; they didn't turn it off, and they just lost sight of the fact that they never turned it off and that it was running in the first place. So I think having visibility in what you have, and then you start shutting off the things you don't need. You don't need RDP running across your enterprise. Turn it off, and start with those types of things. SSH. You don't need that running on every box across your enterprise. Turn it off. So I think that's the best place to start.
Yeah, and Gary, actually, I agree with you I think you're right conceptually. I'm just internally thinking about my experiences with trying to shut things down when I was running cybersecurity programs, and it was so difficult to turn something off because no one knew what it would really do if you turned it off. So I was always moving heaven and earth just to get a protocol turned off or a port turned or a port blocked or something like that. So this gets back to some of what Nick was talking about before, is like a lot of the issues really revolve around the cultural and not what should be done, but how you actually convince people that it's okay to shut off RDP. It's not going to break anything, but Nick, the question is about segmentation. So you want to
yeah, and by the way, you just turn it off and you see who calls you and complains, right? That's the way to do it.
Well, when you're a contractor and the contract gets canceled.
Yeah, you don't want to be the contractor.
And my wife's complaining because we don't have groceries.
Yeah, who needs food anyways? So microsegment, so obviously Gary is right? So understanding the assets you have to manage is kind of baby step 0, but I would say it's even before any kind of zero trust engagement. That should be something you already do, even with perimeter defense. But when you think of zero trust, I have a few key criteria, right, to pick the right solution. For me, it's completely foolish to be hosting your control plane of zero trust and your policy enforcement point on a multi-tenant SaaS service. You want to be able to host it inside of your environments with the same baked-in security you have And the reason why we picked the products we ended up picking for the CNAP, including Illumio, is because we could actually bring this into our premises and our clouds, and not just be dependent on a FedRAMP or not FedRAMP cloud. And we don't even work on the high side anyway. So first, stay away from multi-tenancy hosting when it comes to SaaS services around Zero Trust. That's probably not a good idea. Same for identity management, by the way. But then you also want to have to make sure that the Zero Trust solution you're picking is cloud agnostic, able to run on premise at the edge. And I mean, it depends on your mission, of course, but for us, it was a non-starter not to have hybrid clouds on premise, vSphere, bare metal, all the way to weapons. So wanted to be agnostic. And why wouldn't you want to be? You never know what you're going to need to do in the future. So, you may say, oh, we don't need it today, but the fact is it's not more expensive, and might as well pick a product that has the option. If you have a bunch of options, might as well pick one that has it. Even if you don't need it today, maybe you need it tomorrow, right? So that's the way I think about it. So agnosticity, avoiding vendor lock-in as much as you can. And then, we kind of push some of these products to start embracing configuration as code and policy as code. And so everything is in code in my Git repo. So any kind of whitelist and policy has to be done in Git, and the product would continuously pull from Git instead of using their secret sauce dashboards or whatever, so we can have multiple set of eyes on approving the policies and enforcing the policies instead of having a change management board that takes weeks and years or months or whatever. We use Git with multiple set of eyes to approve them, but it's very quick. It could be few hours with the right people, of course, but in the right training. That's why we always go back to training, because it's all about training and learning and understanding the risk and understanding what we're doing and paying attention to the right process and how to the government is very good at seeing an issue and then turning into a massive bureaucracy, right? And then effectively creating a solution that's worse than the problem, just like the acquisition process of DoD is costing 60 cents on the dollar for each acquisition programs. I would argue the fraud is preventing is probably less than that. So it's just very scary, and so we're very good at overreacting when it comes to policy and bureaucracy. So you wanna have the right enforcement layers at the right stage, and we've done it enough with big organization that we know what works and what doesn't work.
Okay, Catherine, do we have any other questions from the audience? Thanks,
Yes.
Thanks, Gary.
Yes, this question is directed towards Nick. Is the government really prepared to contract correctly for Zero Trust?
Well, you can even remove false Zero Trust, because I don't think the government is prepared to contract correctly for anything, pretty much. So, and it goes back to that training with DAU. I'm still a little shocked. I'm not gonna lie. The fact that my former boss, Miss Lord, who was the Undersecretary for Acquisition Sustainment, was very much understanding the importance of agility, and yet she was in charge of DAU, and yet we failed at mandating that DAU moves from waterfall to agile. There was agile and the way they cheated the system, right? There was agile training created during her tenure, but it wasn't replacing the legacy training. So it's just additional optional training you can take, but it doesn't tell people, hey, that's a new way to do business. So until we fix and train the acquisition community, we're not going to get there anytime soon. And it's not just DoD, of course, it's across the government. We just taught people that learning and changing scope is a bad thing. We're already, even for me, having done it multiple times before my time in DoD, I learned so much. You learn both in terms of the mission, but also in terms of new technologies, new options, new ways to do things. And I can tell you, if my contracts were stuck in time, I would have cost the taxpayer hundreds of millions, instead of being agile like we were, and instead of buying a predefined requirement, we would buy capacity of work. And so all the contract vehicles and the way we structure the contracts and get access to skills, but with a very clear definition of work done, so we know that we're not just buying wasted time. So I created a whole hour video on this, because I feel like people need to really understand what it means to be agile on the acquisition contracting side, and not just the software side, right? Because otherwise you're in a water-agile universe, and that's actually compounding the worst of both, with very little benefits on the other side. So it's probably not a good idea.
Any other questions, Catherine?
The only other question, I don't know if we have time to answer, is around comments on the other directives in the EO, so specifically the alerts and reporting.
Specifically what you said, you cut off, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, alerts and reporting.
Oh. Well, you know, there are so many, I guess I can take it, or you take it, whatever.
Go ahead.
Sorry,
I
thought it was more government stuff, but I guess you are government too, so whatever. So, you know, it's always interesting how people focus on the contract vehicle and the mechanism. We ended up finding out that effectively between OTAs and basic ordering agreements and basic BPAs and all these different vehicles, and I'm not an acquisition guy, okay, I'm a tech guy, but I've learned enough to be dangerous, but more importantly, I learned how to surround myself by the right contracting officers and acquisition and FM people, so we actually get stuff done. And we had to spend a lot of time to train people on you know, what are the right clauses and the right way to buy things, you know, both in terms of the IP side of the house, in terms of how to reuse you know, IP and make it modular across teams, while we're paying, you know, 50 million times basic multi-factor authentication with a CAC, when, you know, that should be just a container that people can reuse. So there are people that use like the excuse of like, you know, Agile does not give you the right insights to be able to report to Congress and things. I just don't understand what Agile is. I can actually show you practically that we get better visibility and better reporting, including a full mapping to what an EVM, you know, process would be, to be able to map it back to the acquisition lifecycle. So it is completely doable. Does it change things? Of course it does, but you actually get more visibility, better insight, and also more importantly, you get to move at the pace of relevance and not wasting taxpayer money, which I think everybody should be pretty excited about. So that's my answer.
So Gary, you have anything to add about the reporting and alerting requirements in the executive order?
Yeah, I would say that, you know, to Nick's point, that there are ways that this can be done. If you look at the way that a lot of the reporting is done nowadays, or today, currently, it's, you know, oh, I just send up a report. I fill out an Excel spreadsheet and I send it off to some entity and you know, I fill in some blanks. That's not visibility. That's not, you know, it's amazing the number of people that find creative ways to change a denominator so that the percentage looks higher, right? You know, so I don't have a lot of faith in current government reporting when it comes to you know, the security and the stableness of our enterprises, just because of that. And until we find some way to really build that into code and have that, you know, a little less human involvement when it comes to understanding the true state of our enterprises, we're gonna continue to be surprised by, I don't understand how that happened. I thought you told me everything was, you know, 100% patched. It turns out it was only 30% patched. Well, you know, I was getting a little creative in my denominator, so the numbers look good for me. So I think that until we fix that problem, until we get out of this manual reporting, until we get the human element out of the middle of the reporting, that you know, humans don't want to look bad, you know, reporting is always going to be suspect.
Yeah, well,
it's also stale and behind, and the data is already, by the time you get it, it's already stale and useless. So that, you know, anything that's manual, not completed. That's why we created so many dashboards, live dashboards, both for cyber, for the continuous authority to operate, and also for the acquisition side of the house, and the kind of the tracking of work and velocity of work and metrics with the raw metrics and all the good stuff that we track in DevSecOps. You know, if it's not live dashboards, I don't want to hear about it.
Yeah.
Yep.
My experience with reporting in the government was that once the report was done, everyone thought the job was complete because you checked off the box. You're required to report, but then nobody acted on the report. So what was the point? You know? So
we're very good at funding reports after report, and just in case before you make a decision, you want to still make a third report just before you decide, because you know, you wouldn't want to make decisions without a lot of data, right? So
I'm gonna have to file a report on what you just said, Nick. Sorry. So anyway. All right, well, we're running down close to the hour. I think we're getting ready to finish out. I think, Catherine, you wanted to do the outro, so to speak, right?
No, I'm going to hand that over to Joyce, but thank you.
I'm sorry. All right, sorry. You're on
You're
mute,
muted.
Joyce. No meeting is complete without that. Someone's got to say
Yeah.
you're on mute.
There we go.
There we go.
All right. Well, gentlemen, this was great. Thank you to Illumio, Don McLean, and especially Nick Chaillan for today's excellent discussion. A recording of today's session will be available at ICITECH.org very soon. Please feel free to follow up with today's contributors or directly with ICIT with any additional questions or engagement inquiries. And consider becoming a member, which would allow you to receive our monthly legislative briefings, giving you updates on what's happened, what is about to happen, so that you could be proactive on your agency or organization's directives. Now, after a 3-year hiatus, the ICIT Gala is back. Go to our website, again, that's www.icitech.org for more information on the awardees and how you can become a sponsor or purchase individual corporate tickets. Thank you so much again to everyone. Have a wonderful day. Live long and prosper.
All right. Thank you, Nick, and thank you, Gary.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you, Joyce and Catherine, too.